I wish I could show you my A-level results. Maybe after this, I can send you the picture.
Adam, thank you so much for joining me here today on the Go at Manav. For those that do not know you, could you please tell them a bit more about yourself?
Hello, everyone. I'm Adam, Executive Director and co-founder of Stickum. Stickum is a social enterprise, and our mission is to bring quality STEAM education to every child.
Well, I'm looking forward to learning more about your career journey as we go through this podcast. So, Adam, usually I like to go back in time with my podcast guests just to understand a bit more about them before they became the person that they are today. So, going back, Adam, could you please tell us a bit more about growing up and what were you doing before you turned 18 years old?
I'm Korean. I was born in Korea, and I migrated over to Singapore when I was 7 years old. So I did my primary one in Singapore, back in Korea, and I came over to Singapore, did P1 again. So when I was 18, I was actually studying for my A levels. And it was a pretty special year because it was the year that I retained in my junior college in Singapore after completely destroying my, not destroying, like really failing my exams for the promotional exams in junior college year one. And back then, I still remember I was not really focused on academics. Actually, yeah, it was never my main focus throughout most of my educational journey. And this story kind of goes back all the way back to how my interest in robotics started. When I was 6 years old, my mom bought me my first Mars rover kit. It was like full of wires, soldering, and I was starting inhaling all the lead fumes without knowing how to use it and trying to put on solar panels without knowing what the colors of the wires meant. But eventually I
Mhm.
got it to work, and it really made me like fall in love with the idea of building, with the idea of tinkering and just understanding things. Coming over to Singapore in primary two, I wanted to join the school's robotics club, but there was a selection test. And I think, if I remember correctly, there were about 100 students that wanted to join the club, but they only had 10 slots to give. And the reason behind that was because they only had limited number of Lego robotics kits. I was going to like
Mm.
a public school in Singapore, and there was only one or two teachers that had the knowledge to teach coding and robotics for the club. And I remember failing that test so badly, the selection test, that I went home. I was almost on the verge of crying, telling my mom that, Mom, I didn't get in. And my mom, being the loving mom that she is, the very next day goes to the school, talks to the principal, and convinces her somehow to let me into the club. And ever since that day, the reason why I went to school was to build things. And so you can see how my kind of like throughout my primary school, my secondary school, and all the way to my junior college, my attention was quite away from academics. I think back then I was so focused on preparing for the World Robotics Championships, as well as the swimming competition, as well as organizing some other science and mathematics council competitions and stuff. It was a year of great challenge because I never thought I would be retaining, and that really helped made me rethink about what my future might be. It was a low point in my life, I would say, but also probably the most transformational.
So, this was all before you were 18 years old.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. That was a very inspiring answer to know that your mom was actually able to convince the head somehow to let you into the school robotics program. So now flash forward, now you're about 18 years old. And you said you were doing your A levels. Were you doing them in Singapore or were you doing them outside of Singapore?
It was all in Singapore.
Yeah.
So that year was pretty tough because that was the year that I was hit with a retaining letter and saying that, hey, you aren't good enough to proceed. So you got to repeat the year and take this exam. I thought I've learned my lesson and I thought I would focus on my exams a bit more. And for the first half of the year, I think it went pretty well. I was like doing all my results were going up. I had like a few B's, a few C's. Percentiles were going up as well, like 80 percentile, 90 percentile. But
Mhm.
old habits die hard, man. So
Of
I
course.
yeah, towards the end of the year, as a normal student would typically be focusing so much on their final stretch to the A level exams, I started building computers because I told myself, well, I want to give myself a source of motivation to really do all my exams. And I told myself, okay, right after A levels, I'm going to go and build my own personal computer. But of course, the moment that thought came into my mind, I started researching about different parts of a computer. How do you build a computer instead of studying for my goddamn A level exams? And then I started to buy them because, well, why not buy them now and
Of
wait until the
course.
exam's over?
Yeah.
And then I started flipping parts to get better parts without having to spend the money that I didn't have and selling it and then starting to teach people how to build computers. And in the middle of that, I took my A levels.
How was that actually balancing your A levels and then your computer building? Because obviously at that time your focus would have been on academics, but you decided to pursue your passions along with your studies. Did you want to pursue a 9 to 5 job or knowing that you really wanted to, go down this perhaps entrepreneurship path, if that's what you were thinking at that time? How did you balance both of them?
I wish I could show you my A-level results. Maybe after this, I can send you the picture. It's
That's
horrible.
a
Yeah.
okay.
I didn't do well. And I think back then, I wouldn't say I was purely looking for a 9 to 5 job. It was more like I was just following my interests and trying to kind of let it flow. Of course, there was a lot of pressure from my parents to try to focus a bit more on exams. And in the home, it wasn't a pretty, sometimes it was pretty difficult for me having internal conflicts as to like, why am I not capable of focusing on my exams, right?
Yeah,
Constantly being distracted by my own interests. Do I not have the discipline to go and just make sure that I just study for exams for like 3 to 4 months and get a good score, do what everyone else is doing, and try to join the best university in Singapore or internationally?
that's society. Yeah, society will tell you that.
But on hindsight, I think it was because of this that I got into the entrepreneurship space in the first place. Regardless of what happens, I'm going to continue to hone my skill in robotics, find some opportunity to make that happen, and join a big corporate, not corporate, but the most exciting robotics firm that I could find. And back then, the one that I had in mind was Boston Dynamic. They were amazing. It was the thing that just had my eyes glued to their videos. As I was going through national service, one of my primary school and secondary school friend that I haven't spoken to for years suddenly messages me out of the blue and says, "Hey, do you want to meet up for lunch? I'm meeting this bunch of people, and I think they are like kind of your kind of people." And I was like, "What do you mean, my kind of people?" And back then, I was a really kind of deep set introvert, so I didn't really go out much. I didn't really socialize much. I would most likely have said no, but for some reason, there was a small side of me that said, "Hey, just go, man. Like this, what is that to lose?"
Mm. Yeah.
And that lunch was when I started meeting all these other innovators and crazy entrepreneurs around my age, like, and a little bit older. Like a few of them were trying to change the genes of rice to be able to grow in saline waters, or some of them were trying to build a human flourishing app. A lot of really cool people. And I was interning under them and trying to build robot prototypes for them. And I thought, well, if I can build their prototypes, why can't I do that for myself and maybe even start my own company? So that was when that idea was first planted. That's how I first got into the world of entrepreneurship.
Wow. So you realize, okay, with your A levels, you didn't do that well. What was the next step from there where you're like, you know what? It's okay. I know exactly what I need to do now. And it's this entrepreneurship path. I'm not going to go down the typical 9 to 5. So what happened after you got your A level results? I mean, what were the next few months like for you?
So in Singapore, after we get our A-level results, we are pretty preoccupied with the imminent, what do you call it?
It's like reality hits.
Yeah, the imminent approach of our national service. Like everyone in
Mm.
Singapore has to serve the national service, is like the military. And that's a big thing for everyone. Like no one wants to go in, or at least most of my friends. And it's 2 years of, I think, of, to me, it's like the most precious time of my life being taken away. Honestly, yes, when I received the results, I was like, holy shit. what's my what's my university plans? What is it gonna be?
At least you didn't have to worry about that now. You had to go to the army still. So you still had 2
Yeah,
years to figure it out.
exactly. So I was like, okay, screw that. Let's just focus on the army. So, and I was very unfit then, I think. So I started to get fit because if you're not fit, you have to serve 2 more months of military service in Singapore
Mm.
to make you fit.
Do you know
Yeah.
that?
So I started like exercising quite a bit, but I remember I only had like less than 1.5 months between the end of my A levels and starting my national service. So it was a very short period of time. And once I entered the national service, I guess my mind was pretty preoccupied with that element. As you can tell, I live in the present. I don't really like think ahead.
No, of course. You had your 2 years you were in the army,
Mm.
and then now after that, I'm guessing, okay, now you have to go to university. If that's what you did you want to go? Parents forced you to go? Or were you like to them, can I please go and do this entrepreneurship stuff? I've been, even in the army, you were there for 2 years. Did you think about your interest in, programming and computer and robotics? How did you manage all of that while you were in the army?
Yeah. So remember the computer business thing that I told you about? So throughout half of my time in the national service, I was bored out of my mind in the weekends, or I was essentially moonlighting. This is kind of illegal, but yeah, I was moonlighting during my national service. Yeah, building up my business. I think it grew pretty well because it clashed with COVID. Like, when everyone started staying at home and they wanted to play games, and then the prices of GPUs really spiked, the demand for
Yeah.
it really increased, and I was riding that wave. So it was doing pretty well. And I was like, well, what if I wanted to continue on this path and see what I could make out of it? And it was then soon after that was when I had the lunch, right?
Yes, yes, you mentioned.
And every weekend they would have events and I would try to join those events. And it started to slowly form in my head like a picture of what I wanted. And I think it was very, very fortunate because okay, back then I still remember I just applied for whatever university I could and I just told myself whatever university I get in, I'll just take it. It was really just like spraying and praying, and see what comes up. Because I don't think I was really concerned about that because I was focusing a lot more on the experiences that I was having in the incubator, which eventually transformed into starting Stickum before I
Mm.
started my university, which was a very timely thing because if Stickum didn't start before I started university, I don't know if I would have turned out the same way. Right.
Wow, that's powerful.
So let's move the timeline ahead a little bit. So I finished my national service. I'm interning in the venture capital firm, the incubator. And 3 months in, I started thinking about what I want to do, like my own company, my own innovation. And because they were all social, on environmentally focused startups, I was kind of influenced in that way. My understanding of entrepreneurship was to create a form of innovation and make a business out of it that helps someone or something. And a few months in, I see one of my Instagram stories from one of my juniors in secondary school from the same, well, we were in different schools, but the schools are very close together in terms of the robotics club. We trained together. And that
Mhm.
was when I met my co-founder, Inkai. He's like 5 years younger than me. In Singapore, we have polytechnics. So he was a year one poly student. And I was looking at his stories and I saw something very interesting. And I asked him what it was. And what I saw then was the first ever version prototype of what Stickum is now. And he asked me whether I could help him build something really cool for this exhibition that he was having, where it was part of a competition that he entered as a representative of the school, as a school student.
Yeah.
And there were like prime ministers coming down, all the ministers were coming down, I think. And it was the first public event where people could be out of their houses right after COVID. So the expected turnout was huge. And it was in the middle of Chinese New Year as well. And we got the opportunity to have a booth there to sell and advertise Stickum to the public because that was part of the competition. And the aim of the competition was to generate as much revenue as possible. So he wanted me to help him build something really, really cool to capture the attention of a lot of kids and parents. And it turned out really well. By the end of the 3 nights, we had 150 sets of orders. So it was so much higher than we were prepared for. And the Prime Minister took a photo of us with us and posted it on his Facebook.
The Singapore Prime Minister.
Yeah. And back
Wow.
then it was Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong.
Wow.
And that really got me excited because I was like, wait, are you guys interested in taking this into like a proper company? And they said, yeah. And I was like, interning at a venture capital firm right now. And I've learned so much about the startup ecosystem. Can I join you guys? I think for everyone, it was a little bit weird because imagine 17-year-olds trying to start a company in Singapore.
Yeah.
And this other senior, we weren't necessarily that close, asking them whether they wanted to really build a company with him. So in the beginning, it was like, okay, let's see what happens. But I think we were all aligned in the sense that eventually we want to see whether this could be a real company.
Yep.
And 2 weeks after that, the judge of that competition, one of the judges of that competition, calls us and says, "Hey, are you guys interested in bringing this into a real company?" We're like, wait, why? Because if you are, I would like you guys to come down and pitch to me with like your business plan and your projections and all that. Maybe I want to invest in you. And we prepared the most crazy like business pitch that made absolutely no sense at all. And our ask was $20,000 for 20% of the company.
Wow.
We didn't know what we were doing.
Yeah, of course. But that's how you learn.
Yeah, and that's how we learned. And luckily, he rejected the deal. But for some reason, having that person, because he was a big, big person in Singapore, he has like the biggest solar panel farm and generator in Singapore. It was a big deal for us. Like, that's a sense of validation. If he feels that there's some potential in what we are doing and the product that we've created, then let's just continue pursuing it and see whether we can make it to something big, something impactful. So that gave us the confidence to really start formalizing the way we work, like generating our shareholders agreement and really planning out what each of our roles are and how we are going to contribute to this project in the years coming ahead. Bring the story back to the timeline. So then by the time I started my university in Singapore University of Technology and Design, I was already 6 months, 7 months deep in starting Stickum. So
Okay.
my mindset of going in was, okay, let's continue to build my company through the university.
Actually, so first, before you get into more about Stickum, could you please tell the listeners briefly what is Stickum and, describe it to someone who might not know what it is?
Yeah. So at Stickum, our mission is to bring quality STEAM education to every child because right now there are nearly 1 billion children who are growing up without STEAM education. And there are two main reasons behind this. The first reason is that current STEAM education infrastructure are ridiculously inaccessible. They're either too expensive or too complex for public schools to be using it. And the second reason is that there are simply not enough teachers who can teach these things. Because if you can teach coding and robotics, you probably won't be teaching in a public school. STEAM education maybe a decade ago would have been seen as, oh, that's the kind of education that the rich people get when they send their kids to like expensive enrichment centers. But today you see it becoming a necessity, not a luxury. You see governments across the world, like Singapore, Vietnam, Brunei, Indonesia, and many Western countries as well, starting to implement and enforce STEAM education on the public school level. But of course, without the teachers who are teaching in these public schools are not trained to conduct STEAM education, nor are the schools equipped with the infrastructure to do it, to support it. So globally, there is a challenge in implementing STEAM education, and we are trying to bridge that gap. To that end, we created a really affordable and intuitive STEAM kit, and we paired it with an online platform that provides teachers of any background. Like you could be a music teacher, you could be a math teacher who have never done robotics or programming before, or never used ICT in your classes before,
Yeah.
and you'd still be able to conduct STEAM activities using our lesson materials entirely on your own.
Wow. And so for people who are also probably wondering what is STEAM, like how would you describe STEAM?
So I'm sure many of us are probably familiar with STEM. So that's science, technology, engineering, and arts and maths. But STEAM is just STEM plus the arts. And commonly, this arts is misinterpreted in the form of, oh, do you mean like fine drawing or sculpting, artistic skills? Yes, but not predominantly. Like most of the art component comes in the form of humanities. Like, for example, being able to apply design thinking practices into the rest of STEM, or being able to understand, empathize with people, understand how humans work and live in a society and all that stuff.
Yep, no, absolutely. So you were saying that you now entered university and you have this business idea that you were doing, you pitched to already an investor, potential investor who already rejected. But now you're thinking, okay, now I'm about to enter university. This is a great opportunity and way for me to really collaborate, with the careers department, the student union, and get more exposure. Was it then when you were in university you realized, okay, I'm not going to do the 9 to 5. I'm now going to take this serious. I'm going to graduate. Did you still so actually, yeah, that's first part of my question. Like, what was that like trying to balance your business and in university? And did you still like, how were your grades? Maybe that's yeah.
Yeah.
I'm
So
curious.
Singapore University of Technology and Design is a bit unique in a sense that it's a university that was designed around application and technical expertise. So really less focus on the research and purely academic side of things, but really focusing on the students' ability to learn technology, apply these skills in the real world context. Our school, for most of the modules, is up to 40 to 60% of your modules results are decided through projects, decided through application based, through by applying the concepts that you've learned through the module instead of just being tested on the final exams and midterm exams. This aligned with me very well because my mindset, and as I was going through my university, was pretty clear. The first and foremost priority was to build Stickum as fast as I possibly can, as successfully as I possibly can, and apply and pull in as much resources as I can from this university to help in this direction. The second priority was academics with a certain goal in mind because I realized that if I purely focused on Stickum alone and completely neglected my academics, then what's going to happen is I wouldn't be able to make the most out of my university because there are a lot of things that they teach that is applicable to my company as well, like product engineering, economics, finance, and all that. I took a slightly unconventional path in my university journey as well. So instead of instead of specializing like everyone else into like mechanical engineering or electrical engineering, I took this path called the self-directed path where I could essentially study whatever I wanted. So you'd see me studying like humanities, mechanical engineering, electrical engineering, wireless systems, healthcare engineering. So it gave me the freedom to really select what I needed to learn and align it more with my company.
That's really
So
good.
yeah, it was a very unique experience. And for me, for academics, I told myself, okay, as long as I graduate with a GPA of 4.0 and above out of 5, so that's like second upper in terms of the grading. Yeah, first class, second upper. So as long as I graduate with second upper, I'm happy because that proves to me that I've made the most of the knowledge that I could gain out of the school system and applied as much of it as I can.
Yeah. Were you able to achieve that 4.0 GPA?
Yes, I'm really proud to say that I did manage to get it. I graduated with 4.19, I think, right on the line.
Proves that you were able to make the most of a university and with your business plan. So now, you graduated from university, you're probably wondering what's next. So what happened after you graduated from university?
While I was building Stickum throughout my university, I was always looking up to my seniors, right? What are they doing after they graduate? Do they continue building their companies or do they cave and join the corporate workforce? And unfortunately, I did see most of them that weren't able to build a company that was big enough to support them meaningfully after they have graduated, eventually cave and join the corporate workforce. And their startup would just become like a side hustle.
I see.
So, and it makes sense because Singapore is a pretty brutal country in a sense that if you don't have the income to support yourself, it's pretty hard to live. But that's also not to say that you necessarily need an extremely high amount of income to support yourself. You just need something to come in. But as entrepreneurs, if you are not paying yourselves, then it's very hard to survive.
Yeah.
So for me, throughout the 4 years in my bachelor's degree, I told myself my primary goal is to at least build it. By the time I graduate, I want to make sure that Stickum is a company that can pay myself. Because if I spend 4 years building a company and I can't even get there, then
What's the point?
the company probably isn't going in the right direction anyway. I think when I graduated, it was very clear to me that, okay, this is good. My company is in a pretty good position to support me and my other co-founder who was turning full time together. And so we decided, yeah, this is going to be my full time thing.
Wow. And how old were you when you started Stickum and how old was your co-founder?
I was 20 and they were 17.
They're 17.
Yeah.
Nice, nice. So now fast forward. So when did you graduate university? Was this after COVID?
Last year, June.
Oh wow, very recent. I guess since then, what would you say has been your proudest moment? I mean, you've clearly gone through a roller coaster since you were 18 with the army and now, university, building your business, originally side hustle, but now full time, or now able to support yourself. So what would you say is something you're proud of to this day?
Like there were moments of really incredible highs. Like for example, last year when we won the Hult Prize or when we were nominated for Forbes 30 under 30, those were amazing experiences. But if you ask me what am I most proud about, and this may sound cliche, but it's really just the work that we have done. Over the past 5 years, every single day when we're working on a product or like talking to teachers, trying to convince like ministers of education of various countries, now we have like over 20,000 students across 14 different countries. Being able to have this experience that I almost barely didn't get when I was in primary school. And just thinking about that just gives me a great sense of pride in the work that we have done over the past 5 years.
Wow, 5 years. Wow. That's amazing. That's really incredible that you were able to do so much in those 5 years, listening to your whole career journey right here on this podcast. What would you say, for example, you obviously started a young entrepreneur. What has that been like since then? Because, you've been pitching and thinking about this idea since you were about 17, 18. Do you doubt yourself? Do you have people looking down on you? How do you manage that?
I think this is something that I didn't notice initially, especially in the university environment where there are researchers also doing their own startups. And we were able to bring in a lot of achievements, but in the grand scheme of things, we knew we were very tiny. And in those years, we kept trying to punch above our weight. Not a lot, but some people would look down on us in a sense that, well, this is probably just going to fail, but I'll support them for now because they seem like interesting students. Many of them didn't really manage to take us seriously until we started winning like real results,
It's
like
always
the
like that.
Forbes thing. Yeah, it's always like that. And the difference is huge because right after the Hult Prize, the new Prime Minister of Singapore made another post about us on Facebook and Instagram, and that translated to so much publicity in Singapore that within 3 months, we captured 20% of the primary school market in Singapore through just that. And all the newspapers in Singapore started like wanting to make videos about us, featuring us on a full page on their Sunday Times.
Yeah.
But internally, almost nothing has changed. It's just pure publicity. So what that showed me was, unfortunately, the way the world works is that's just the way the world works. You need to gain credibility that people recognize.
And what would you say you're up to nowadays?
Nowadays we're expanding. We are trying to expand quite rigorously. This year, our focus is on trying to understand how we can expand into another country very fast and simultaneously. I think the general advice is to capture one country, move on to the next country, capture that country and move it on. But I just do not see ourselves ever having to wait for us to capture one country after the other just to get this to more children in the world. So
Yeah.
this year, whilst we continue to capture the schools in Singapore, we're also focusing on getting into schools like Hong Kong, in Indonesia, and in Vietnam. And through these countries, we want to learn how we're supposed to scale internationally into multiple countries simultaneously. So this means really growing the team. This means understanding how we can have modularized and decentralized manufacturing facilities. And also means how do you find that wedge in the education systems of all these various countries to really provide outsized value to the schools and the public students.
Amazing. And this is just the beginning for you guys,
Yeah.
which is awesome. So now, Adam, we're about to reach the end of the podcast. But before then, I have one more question for you. And that is, what would you say to your 18-year-old self, considering how much you've been able to achieve over the last 5 years?
That's a loaded question. I think I would just tell myself to trust myself in being myself. Because oftentimes when I reflect back on how things turned out this way, there were a lot of moments that just seemed so incredibly lucky. But
Mm.
one consistency that I've seen throughout all these fortunate events or unfortunate events is that firstly, I just kept doing what I wanted to do. And secondly, I really wouldn't be here today if any of those significant events actually didn't happen or it happened the way I wanted it to. Because if I did well for my A levels, I've probably joined NUS in computing, and now I'll probably be in some corporate job fixing bugs all day as a software engineer.
Now I actually have one more question based on what you were just saying, because it's simple but true what you mentioned about just keep doing what you were doing, because eventually it carved the path that you wanted to do as opposed to what society would have wanted you to do anyways. So my last final question, which is, I guess, secondary to the 18-year-old question, and that is, actually, is there anything else you want to say to the listeners, whether that's entrepreneurship, going after your dreams, your hobbies, your passions? What would you say?
I think what I would say is focus not on what people are telling you to do, but instead really trying to understand who you are as a person, what you find interest in, and really trying to align that with the value that you can provide to your society or the world. Too many times in my past have I been influenced by society or parents sometimes in directions that I knew wasn't aligned with what I wanted to do, and that created incredible moments of personal stress and self doubt.
Of course.
But in retrospect, spending that time to really develop my own interests really helped in defining what I wanted to become, even though back then I didn't really know it. But that personal alignment deep down, just following what I always wanted to do, eventually shaped my journey into being able to pursue my interests much later on.
And your parents always supported you with that.
Okay, so this is a little bit of a funny story. When I was 15 years old, I went through a very, very bad rebellious phase. After that, I think my parents also kind of understood that I wanted to carve out my own path in life, and they just let me be. So since then, they have been very, very supportive of essentially everything that I've been doing, and I wouldn't be here without them.
When you said rebellious, what does that mean at 15 years old?
For example, there used to be under curfew, right? I would have to be back home from school or wherever I was by 9 p.m. But I wanted to build robots, and I guess back then I just wanted to finish building a robot as fast as I possibly could because there were like national, international, and global level competitions coming up. So I would try to stay as late as I can, like until 11 p.m. and take the last train back home
Wow.
just to be in school 7 hours later. That didn't really vibe well with my parents because to them, they don't really know if I'm actually in school building robots. At some point, I just decided I'm not going to tell them. I'm just going to stay and do what I want to do. It was the same for sleepovers. My mom would never let me do sleepovers. So at some point, I just told her, sorry, mom, I'm going to be staying over at my friend's house tonight.
Well, we definitely went over our last question, but a lot to cover there, which was great. But thank you so much, Adam, for joining me here today on the Go with Manav. For those who would like to get in touch to learn more about you, what would be the best way for them to do that?
You can find me on Instagram at Hodam, HUH_DAM_Adam, ADAM.
Amazing. For both Instagram and LinkedIn. Thanks so much, Adam. For those watching on YouTube, make sure to like and subscribe, and you guys will be on very soon. Thank you, Adam, for joining me here today, and hopefully I'll see you in Singapore sometime soon.
Yes, see you, Manav. Thank you so much for having me.